Prime Field.
In the win over Ohio State, Yukon allowed 4 of the first 5 three-pointers of the game. The Buckeyes opened with pace and accuracy, yet trailed by the end of the first quarter that early surge, and Yukon's rapid adjustment forms the central tension of this story. At the same time, Michigan's Olivia Olsen delivered a 20-point performance against Notre Dame, built not on perimeter volume but on deliberate, repeated penetration into the paint. She finished 7 for 17 from the field, reached the free throw line 7 times, and functioned as Michigan's primary initiator. This documentary examines a simple, decisive question. Can UConn withstand a player operating at Olsen's current level if its defense requires a full quarter to settle? The analysis begins with the foundation of Olsen's attack itself, and what it demands from any defense attempting to contain it. Olivia Olsen's recent scoring surge has been defined by versatility. Against Notre Dame, she produced from the mid-range, the paint, and selective perimeter attempts. Her 1 for 6 from three-point range was not a sign of hesitation. It reflected a preference for controlling possessions inside the arc. Her 7 free throw attempts signal consistent pressure on the rim. Each drive forced rotation decisions, drew fouls, or collapsed the defense. Olsen's usage extended beyond scoring. With 3 assists in 31 minutes, she operated as a half-court and the transition initiator, shaping spacing and tempo. Michigan's overall rebounding deficit in that game, 50-28, did not diminish her role. Despite limited second-chance opportunities, Olsen maintained on-ball responsibility and continued to generate offense. The tape establishes a clear pattern. She hunts mismatches, probes gaps, and commits fully to dribble-based creation. This offensive identity sets the stage for UConn's most important countermeasure, point-of-attack disruption. In UConn's 100-68 victory over Ohio State, guard K. Arnold demonstrated how early defensive pressure can redirect an entire game. The first quarter concluded 27-24, despite Ohio State's efficient outside shooting. UConn forced 6 turnovers in that opening period, establishing a degree of disruption that kept the hot shooting from translating into a sustained lead. By the second quarter, that pressure intensified. UConn held Ohio State to single-digit scoring as drives were cut off, passing lanes flattened, and perimeter rhythm dissipated. The Buckeyes' offensive productivity stalled as soon as their primary handlers were steered away from the teeth of the defense. Arnold's role in this framework is distinct. She navigates screens without conceding space, stabilizes UConn's perimeter structure, and limits the cascade of kickouts that often follow penetration. Against a player like Olsen, who relies on attacking the paint before generating secondary actions, this first layer of resistance is critical. The next issue, however, concerns sustainability. Pressure alone is insufficient without discipline. Arnold committed 0 fouls in the Ohio State game. For a guard applying full court and half-court pressure, this fact carries strategic weight. Foul control determines continuity. If the primary defender remains available, the defensive scheme maintains its structure. If foul trouble occurs, rotations deepen and matchups shift, placing less experienced defenders against elite creators. Olsen's performance underscores the risk. She converted 5 of 7 free throws against Notre Dame. Each trip to the line reflected a successful paint touch or forced contact. Even marginal reach-ins can generate the rhythm that accompanies repeated free throw opportunities. For UConn, this means the margin for error at the point of attack narrows. Arnold's ability to pressure without fouling becomes a stabilizing force, ensuring that defensive counters remain intact through all 4 quarters. Yet even with disciplined guards, one structural vulnerability remains: switching. Michigan's offensive design frequently seeks mismatches through ball screens, handoffs, and angle cuts. When defenders switch, Olsen gains immediate access to slower or larger opponents. Her 1 for 6 perimeter line does not diminish the threat. Those numbers illustrate her preference for exploiting interior space rather than settling for jump shots. When matched with a power forward or center, Olsen gains the advantage of quick separation, increased driving lanes, and the likelihood of drawing contact. The second risk emerges after the drive. Delayed recovery by the switch defender can expose corner shooters or allow additional cutting actions. Against Notre Dame, Olsen's 3 assists reflected this pattern. She used penetration to activate teammates even in a game where spacing margins were limited. UConn demonstrated an alternative model against Ohio State. Rather than switching, the team relied on disciplined on-ball containment and timely help without surrendering primary assignments. This reduced the availability of easy mismatches and kept offensive flow predictable. Against Olsen, that same rigidity becomes essential. Avoiding unnecessary switches is not a stylistic choice. It is a defensive safeguard. The slow start against Ohio State revealed both a vulnerability and a capacity for rapid correction. Early perimeter lapses allowed the Buckeyes immediate scoring traction. The Huskies absorbed that pressure but recovered through turnovers and improved closeouts. Against Olsen, the stakes shift. Her scoring pattern depends on early rhythm, interior access, and the establishment of dribble-based control. If UConn concedes unchallenged drives in the opening minutes, Michigan's offense expands into secondary and tertiary actions that are more difficult to suppress. Conversely, constraining Olsen early disrupts Michigan's timing and forces lower percentage possessions. The first quarter becomes the structural hinge of the matchup, the period in which defensive execution determines the trajectory of the game. What follows is the broader implication for UConn's season and for Olsen's rapid ascent. Olivia Olsen enters this matchup operating at peak confidence and measurable efficiency. 20 points, 3 assists, and a sustained presence in the paint demonstrate a scoring profile that demands an immediate defensive response. Her recent performance against a top 20 opponent signals a developing role as Michigan's most assertive creator. UConn's response, particularly its first quarter engagement, will influence the course of the game and set a benchmark for its broader defensive identity moving forward. Arnold's pressure, discipline, and matchup stability represent the tactical foundation. Scheme adherence, especially the refusal to switch mismatches, forms the secondary layer. This contest will not determine the long-term legacy of either program. It does, however, offer a clear view of two converging trajectories: a rising score, establishing a multi-dimensional offensive profile, and a defensive system refining its early game precision. The legacy of this moment lies in that intersection, where one player's emergence challenges a seasoned defensive structure to respond without delay. The Ohio State game introduced a new dimension to UConn's rotation. Blanca Quinones functioning as a high-impact scorer off the bench. Her 18.4 rebound performance arrived in the middle phases of a game in which UConn outscored Ohio State 52-27 across the second and third quarters. That surge did not originate from a single hot hand. It reflected a structural shift in UConn's rotation, where fresh legs and secondary creators enter precisely as opponent fatigue begins to accumulate. The second quarter alone produced a 23-6 UConn advantage. Quinones checked in during this period, and her timing coincided with the point at which Ohio State's five-guard lineup struggled to contain size, length, and interior physicality. Sarah Strong led the scoring in those middle frames, but Quinones initiated the first wave of separations and attacking the paint and generating pace before the starters re-established control after halftime. Her scoring profile against Ohio State was defined not by perimeter volume, but by physical drives and transition creation. At 6'2", she exploited matchups that Ohio State's smaller guards could not absorb. UConn's postgame analysis emphasized that drives by Quinones, AZ Fudd, or Sarah Williams produced high percentage opportunities in a game where interior access became a decisive factor. Quinones operated not as a catch-and-shoot specialist, but as a secondary initiator, handling the ball and facilitating actions that expanded UConn's spacing. This bench production arrives in contrast to Michigan's system. Against Notre Dame, Michigan produced a 38-2 bench scoring advantage, but the distribution relied primarily on role players. Brooke Quarles-Daniels secured rebounds and generated defensive stops. Ashley Sofalkanish contributed double-digit scoring. Yet the Wolverines' broader offensive identity remains anchored to their starters, Olsen, Swords, and Holloway, who generate the majority of creation and usage.
Prime Field!